Anne-Marie here, and today we are organizing Inkpads. So I have my Inkpads stored in a system that I like, but it had kind of fallen apart as far as like actually being organized. It was just a hot mess instead. And I had a bunch of distress inks that don't currently fit in that system, and I wanted to see if I could combine them. So there was a lot of ink pads that were missing swatches. There were a lot of ink pads that I knew were drying out or already dried out. I had bought some new ink pads. And so it was just kind of a hodgepodge. So first I'm just going to pull everything out. And I was a little overwhelmed by how many I had, and including all my, distress inks and everything. So if you've never seen my organizational videos before, I just let the camera go and I play music in the background, and then I pop on in and out when I have something to say. So I put those timestamps in the description box below. So if you don't want to work alongside me or work on a project that you've got going, then you can just click those to hear what you're interested in. So again, you just check those out in the description box below. All right, so first up, I gathered all of my ink pads together. I did pull the distress inks back out because I'm not sure yet if they're going to fit in the FOAMCORE divided system that I have. So I'm just going to sort all the colors that I have, rainbow order, and then light to dark, and just kind of get a sense of what colors I have. So as I go through, I'm going to kind of swatch them with that rubber stamp that you see there. It's just a little wood-mounted stamp of a little jewel, and it's a pretty solid stamp, so I find it to be really helpful for swatching or for testing ink pads. So I'm just going to use that to stamp onto some scrap paper. I'm also going to wipe down all my ink pads because they just have gotten inky, and some of them have gotten a little gunky from who knows what. And so I'm just giving everything a good little wipe down. It's the worst when I'm like working on a project and just from handling the ink pad, I get ink on my fingers, and then, I ruin my project by bumping it or something. And so I also end up, when I swatch them, I take off the lid and I run it around the inside of the lid along the base, just again, to get it all nice and clean. so now it's time for me to start swatching. So I've just got this little notebook of scrap paper that I keep near my desk, and I'm just going to ink up the stamps and test them on that paper, and in between I'll clean the inside, like I mentioned, of the ink pad case along the base and the lid, and then I'll also clean the stamp off in between the different colors. I kind of hate this, but I have sort of a disposable mentality when it comes to ink pads. I would prefer to keep an ink pad and be able to re-ink it when I need to. The problem is I don't have storage for re-inkers. I don't have money for re-inkers. And it doesn't always work to like have an ink pad and then go find the re-inker when you're ready, because manufacturers change the formula or the brand disappears. Like I haven't seen these Ranger dye ink pads in I don't know how long. And they're just gone. Like you can't find a good re-inker. I know that it's probably okay to like take any sort of dye ink to reuse to re-ink your ink pad. The problem is the color could also be a little different, and then it might end up blotchy. I've never been good at re-inking. Like there's just so many reasons that I don't re-ink. If the ink pad is dry, I toss it and move on. The good news is I've tossed probably less than a dozen ink pads the entire time I've been scrapbooking, and I've been scrapbooking since like 2004. So I don't feel too awful about it. It's definitely not the most consumable part of the hobby for sure. would have made better sense to like pull the ink pads out as I noticed they were dry, but I just ended up going back and flipping through the swatches and eyeballing which ones I knew just didn't look very good. And then I gave them a second test in some cases before I decided whether or not I was going to pitch them. Most of them went back. So now it's time to make my swatches. I just cut little strips of cardstock at 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to snip them with my scissors at, about 1/2 inch long. And then I'm going to press it onto the ink pad and then stick that on the side of the ink pad, the short end. And then when I put it in my storage, that end will be facing out so I can see at a glance what the color is. I do this for 2 reasons. One, because I store my stamps, my ink pads, horizontally so that the ink stays distributed evenly, right? But that means I can only see the short end. I can't see the lid. But also those lids aren't accurate. Like, I don't know how many times the color's, slightly off or really off or just not as saturated as the lid is. So I prefer to have the actual ink color visible to me when I'm making my choices, because after all, that's what's going to be on my project. distress ink pads. Like I mentioned, they didn't fit into my FOAMCORE system. I have like little shelves made out of FOAMCORE. You'll see them at the end. They're not amazing, but I don't care because they work excellently. The only problem is that the distress inks, there's too many distress inks and really too many of the other ink pads too. So I can't fit all of my ink pads into the FOAMCORE. It's a goal someday. I'd like to get there, but I'm not there yet. So I kept them separate, and at this point I'm looking through my distress inks and I'm picking what to, I'm just sorting them by color again, and I'm going to go through kind of the whole same process. The one little difference is I've had some of these distress inks since I began scrapbooking, so there are going to be more that I end up getting rid of because they are dried out, and I'm trying to move away from muddy colors. I really personally prefer bright saturated colors, so that's what I'm focusing on going forward. So for my distress inks, I didn't really do the swatch stamp test again. There were a few that I knew were dry and that I was going to test. And so I would test those, but just by pressing the whole ink pad down. My big focus on my distress inks, I wanted to make sure I had a light, medium, and dark across the rainbow, which for me includes a teal, a blue-green, just because I really prefer to blend. I like to do lots of gradients, and so like ideally I would have a dark, medium, and light in across the spectrum. I'm not there yet, and I know that's like completely against my other goal of getting my ink pads to all fit into one container, but whatever, it is what it is. So I did a lot of writing down shades and kind of making sure I had as many as I wanted to have across the color spectrum, and I was kind of I was considering getting rid of all my other inks completely and just going with distress inks moving forward. But I decided ultimately not to do that because I do enjoy things like, the Brilliance inks or white inks or different things like that. And I'm not always looking to blend. Like I prefer the distress just to blend. I don't feel like they always stamp very well on their own. I prefer the coverage of my other inks. So I did a lot of thinking and plotting and trying to figure out if I had enough or if this counted as this color or that. And I was also shopping, but I didn't end up buying any and just decided to stick with what I had. But I did decide that I would buy reinkers for the distress ink pads. These guys have been around for a long time, and I feel like they're not going anywhere. I feel like I can maybe rely on these to stick around, but we'll see. settled on different rainbows. I have like a vintage rainbow and a dark and a bright. And I'm just going through and making swatches for ones that don't have one yet. I cut these a little thicker. They're more like 1/3 of an inch because the side of the distressed ink pad is thicker. And that was pretty much it for the distressed inks. FOAMCORE storage. It is rough looking, like I wouldn't want somebody looking at it up close, but it is tucked back inside a cabinet and it's beautiful. I just, the lid is, or the door is shut to it most of the time. I have my distress inks and that metal basket there. My blending brushes and my markers are in that bucket. And so I can just look at a glance and grab what I need really easily. And I've been using this system since sometime during COVID when I made the little FOAMCORE thing, and I just love it. It's really helped me with my ink organization and usage. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up or consider subscribing. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next time. Bye.